Que el corazón del cielo y de la tierra les proporcione excelentes caminos y abundante sabiduría para construir juntos una sociedad planetaria que tenga como cimiento la armonía, respeto, tolerancia, dignidad y libertad, como nos decretan los abuelos en su fundamento filosófico. Yo soy tú como tú eres yo.
May the heart of sky and earth give us excellent paths and abundant understanding to build together a planetary society which has as its cement harmony, respect, tolerance, dignity, and liberty, as is decreed by our grandparents in the philosophical foundation. I am you as you are me. Mayan sang.
I forget how it came about, but in the course of the conversation, he said, "Well, I hate Americans." And I was really shocked. I'm the godmother of one of his children. I felt like we were very close. We worked very closely together. He knew I was American. And so to all of a sudden have him say, "I hate Americans," really threw me. And I said, "Well, Leopoldo, do you hate me?"
Flo Reed believes that when people work together, things can change for the better. Just ask the thousands of Central American farmers she's worked with, or the families that she worked with in the Peace Corps, or the animals in the Bronx Zoo. They'll tell you. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft
Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful Stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful Stories.
I grew up on Greenfield Hill in Fairfield, Connecticut, which indicates a fairly privileged childhood. My father was a school teacher, so I thought we were poor growing up. But then I got a little broader perspective on things and realized that I was really very lucky to grow up never worrying about food or a good home or education or anything like that. I was lucky in that my parents took me traveling, and so I had a real interest in connecting with other cultures and other countries from an early age. And my parents also took me hiking and camping and out into nature. And they also took me to New York. So not only would my parents take me to the Bronx Zoo, which made me really connect with wildlife and habitat and learn about habitat destruction, and I have an interest in that, but they also took me to the annual meeting. And at those annual meetings, they would have speakers. And I think Jane Goodall might have even been one of the speakers when I was young, but she was certainly one of my heroes as a child, and I think I sort of wanted to be her when I grew up. I grew up going to a church in our town in Connecticut, and the church group would take the high school students every year on a service trip to Appalachia, and we would help to repair and rebuild homes for economically disadvantaged people in Appalachia. And so that definitely had an influence, showing me that there are things that we can do to make life better, to make the world better. Starting from at least high school, I had an idea that I wanted to go overseas and work in a less developed country. And in college, I learned more about the Peace Corps. I suppose I'd heard of it before then. In college, I was also an activist, and so I was out protesting U.S. policy and a lot of what the U.S. government was doing in Central America at the time. And so it was a little bit ironic that maybe a year or so after protesting the U.S. invasion in Panama, I was signing up to go down under the auspices of the U.S. government to Panama as a Peace Corps volunteer. But I really didn't see any better opportunity, realistic opportunity for me to go and really work and contribute in a meaningful way.
What was your specific job that you were supposed to do?
Okay, you're supposed to do it.
That's because
you're like somebody who knows the Peace Corps.
Well, yeah, we'll start with what you were supposed to do and where you were placed, and then we'll see where that takes us.
Okay. So I was supposed to do environmental education. I was invited to be an environmental education volunteer in Panama. However, our group of volunteers was the first group to go back to Panama after I think it was a 20-year hiatus. So Peace Corps was not really fully set up and ready for us. And then when I got to Panama, I was taken out to the province where I'd be serving along with two or three other volunteers who would be serving in that province. And we were supposed to be serving under the auspices of the government's Institute for Natural Resources. And it was the, I think, 60th birthday of the head of that institute for the province. And so instead of being taken to our communities right away, we were taken to his birthday party. And it was Panama. So the birthday party involved kegs of beer, many bottles of rum, and it went all night. And it wasn't until the next day that I was taken to my community, hungover, where most of the community had waited for me for hours the day before, and I had not shown up, and unbeknownst to me that they were there waiting for me. And then they came back again on the day that I did finally show up, and I was dropped off, and I was brought up onto sort of a stage in the open-air community building, and everybody made speeches about how wonderful it was I was there and how I was going to change everything for their community. And then it was my turn to make a speech in my very broken Spanish. And I think I said something along the lines of, here's what I studied in college, and here's how long I'll be here, and I'll try to be useful. Thank you. And everybody stood up and applauded. And I thought, oh, thank goodness, they're easily impressed. Then from there on, I was sort of winging it. There wasn't much I could do with environmental education because when we arrived after our training to start our service, Peace Corps said they hadn't worked things out with the education department yet. And so we should just go to our communities and try to be useful and come back in 3 months for our hepatitis shots, and then we'd see if anything had changed. So I tried to do some environmental education, failed spectacularly trying to do that informally, but then ended up plugging in with a group that was doing a reforestation project. And I ended up being quite successful helping, I think in the end it was 6 different community groups to set up community tree nurseries and do reforestation projects. And so we ended up planting many thousands of trees, and I felt good about that.
It seems to be the Peace Corps way that you start here, you end here, and it's still a life-changing kind of experience.
I lived with a family in Santa Rita, and I had a room that was attached to but sort of set off from the rest of the house. And so when I would come out of my room each morning and stand in the little entryway, I'd be looking out at a wall of bougainvillea that the family had planted, as well as other flowers. If it was the dry season, I'd be smelling the dust in the air. If it was the rainy season, the rain and the moist ground. There'd probably be a rooster crowing somewhere. There'd probably be a dog barking. And then if one dog was barking, the other dogs would be barking. And well, I guess that was true for the rooster, too. One rooster crows and then the next rooster crows. There was a volunteer in our group who speculated that it somehow went all the way around the world. Every few minutes, the chain of crowing roosters. Because I was working with these community groups and we were planting all of these trees, at some point I realized that because the farmers that I was working with were also still continuing to practice slash and burn farming, that was degrading the land and forcing them to every year find a new area to cut and burn, and that each time they repeated this, the land was more degraded. These farmers, unless they were given a better alternative to slash and burn farming, they were eventually going to cut down and burn all the trees that we were planting. And so towards the end of my Peace Corps service, I started working with the community groups on some real agroforestry and agroecology practices. At the time, we would have called it sustainable agriculture, techniques that would allow them to grow on the same land year after year and not have to constantly be looking for a new area to cut down and burn when the land was depleted. So making it more productive over time instead of less productive over time. And I started a little bit of this in the last months of my Peace Corps service. And then my Peace Corps service was up. Went back a year later to visit. I found the reforestation projects, the community nurseries, they were continuing. But the sustainable agriculture that I had tried to get started had not continued.
Slash and burn farming is an agricultural method where farmers cut and burn vegetation to clear land for planting crops. While it provides short-term fertile soil, it often leads to deforestation, soil degradation, and the loss of biodiversity.
At that point, I realized that in order for farmers to transition away from what they had done for generations, probably, to something new, that it would require several years of technical assistance until they became comfortable with it, saw the results of it, and were able to continue on their own. And it was also evident that, while I think Peace Corps is tremendously valuable in the friendship building between countries and many other aspects, that for actually getting the work done on the ground, that local trainers would be more effective than somebody like me. And so those were all the pieces that led me to want to work for a nonprofit that was providing long-term technical assistance in sustainable agriculture, local technical assistance to smallholder farmers, or campesinos, as we said at the time. And I was shocked to learn that there was no organization that was doing that. And so that was what led me to found Sustainable Harvest International, which has been the focus of my career for 28 years now. I found my Peace Corps work to be easier than I thought it would be, despite the fact that I was sort of dropped out in the middle of nowhere without any real structure around my work or guidance. I found it easy because the community and the people were just so welcoming and went so out of their way to make me feel welcomed and safe and a part of the community. And they wanted to work with me. Maybe it was just because it was entertaining to see what bizarre thing the gringo would do next, not being from the culture and not necessarily knowing how to navigate all the details of it. Another one of my Peace Corps friends called it Gringo TV. Most people did not have an actual TV, but they could come over and sit and watch what I was going to do next. The same with the other.
Do you have a gringo moment that stood out?
One that comes to mind was after I'd been working for a while and feeling like my Spanish was really good and feeling happy about the fact that I could communicate and live and work in another language. I was talking about something with a group of women, I can't remember what, but for some reason I said something about a cow, a vaca, and one of the women said, "Oh, listen to that. Listen to how well she says vaca." And I thought, is that the only word that I'm getting right after all this time? But there were lots of moments when I just realized how little I knew, and I was constantly learning from the people in the community. And I think that's what gave me the confidence to think that I could start a new nonprofit, get it up and running, and see it through all the bumps in the road. I had to be self-directed and self-sufficient in ways that I couldn't have imagined as a Peace Corps volunteer, and that has served me so well for the rest of my life. I finished my Peace Corps service in 1993, and I took a job doing corporate responsibility work, and they hired me as a major gifts fundraiser, and fundraising wasn't really what I wanted to be doing, but it was the job I could get, and that ended up being a very valuable experience. I learned a lot about how a well-run nonprofit operates. I learned a lot about fundraising, which, as it turns out, is really important if you want to start a new nonprofit. And from there, I went to a job that sounded like it would be my dream job as the Latin America coordinator for an agroforestry program. Turned out that organization was just a complete mess and wasn't doing what it said it was doing. And that ended up pushing me into a situation where I felt like if the work I'd been trying to get started there was going to happen, I needed to start a new nonprofit to do it, which I'd already had in the back of my head since my Peace Corps days. So in 1997, almost no money, almost no experience, almost no skills relative to starting a new nonprofit, but just enough to think maybe. So I told myself, well, why don't you take the day tomorrow, see if you can see a way to make this happen, and if not, then just face reality, go get a job to pay your bills. My mother helpfully pointed out that if I liked warm weather and Spanish-speaking people, I could move to Florida and get a job at Disney World, which was not really what I had in mind. But then this day when I was banging my head against the wall, against the brick wall for starting a new nonprofit, I heard from a man in Switzerland who I had met on my last trip to Panama. He'd been there with friends. They wanted to see the real Panama. So I said if they'd pay for a rental car so I didn't have to take the bus, that I'd take them out to see where I'd been working, which they did. And then I heard from him on this particular day, and he asked what was happening. And when I told him, he said, well, if you open a bank account for your new nonprofit, I'll wire some money to help get started. And I didn't know how much it would be and if it would be enough, but I figured it was worth a try. The next day, there was $6,000 from Switzerland in the bank account, which is, still a lot of money for the work that I do, but back in 1997, even more so. And I went to the library and took out a book about how to start a new nonprofit, and chapter by chapter went through and learned about what a budget was and what an annual operating plan was and all those sorts of things.
What was your elevator pitch for your nonprofit?
Yes, and that was the first thing I did. Was I sent a letter to every person I'd ever met in my life, or any family connection, or anybody, and I explained to them how we were losing the world's tropical forests at the rate of 1 acre every second, and that they were the source of most of the world's biodiversity, which is the source of most of our medicines and many other things that we all depend on, even though we don't realize it. And that a lot of the loss was because farmers were cutting down more forest every year because they were using short rotation slash and burn farming, which had probably worked when it was a small indigenous population, but now was not working for the farmers and was causing a lot of the loss of these tropical forests, but that there was an alternative where the farmers could do better by using sustainable farming practices, and that the only thing that was missing was adequate technical assistance for them to become comfortable with and become successful with sustainable farming practices. And that I was hiring local trainers, well, to begin with just in Honduras and then eventually in Panama and Nicaragua and Belize as well, to provide them with that technical assistance that they needed to make the transition to sustainable farming practices. That resonated with a lot of people, thankfully, and they started sending them donations and got us up and running. From many years ago, from Honduras, early on, getting sustainable harvest work started, I was going out to visit some farms with one of our employees at the time, and our pickup truck got stuck in a hole in a river, and the water was flowing through the truck. And we were waiting for some other people to come and help us get the truck out. And so we were sitting there talking, and I forget how it came about, but in the course of the conversation, he said, "Well, I hate Americans." And I was really shocked. I'm the godmother of one of his children. I felt like we were very close. We worked very closely together. He knew I was American. And so to all of a sudden have him say, "I hate Americans," really threw me. And I said, "Well, Leopoldo, do you hate me?" And then he looked at me and he said, "Oh, I guess I used to hate Americans. Before I worked with your organization, all I knew about Americans was terrible things that the military had done in my country and terrible conditions that my wife had worked in a sweatshop that was owned by an American company. And I thought that's what America was all about. But now, in these years working with Sustainable Harvest, I've seen your dedication to the work. I've heard about all of the Americans who are donating their money to support Honduran families they don't even know to help make their lives better. And I've heard about the volunteers that are all contributing to this effort back in the United States. And I realize that there's a lot more to America. And so, no, I don't hate Americans anymore. I love the Americans that are supporting this work and the values that are behind that.
Yeah, I mean, that is soft power.
Telling the story of one of the 4,000 farmers who have participated in sustainable harvests programs over the years. And this is a farmer in Panama named Isabel. He joined the Sustainable Harvest Program 20 years ago because he wanted to find a way to produce more on his land so that he could do better for his family. He wanted to give them a better home, and he wanted to be able to afford to send his daughters to high school. And so he joined the program. I visited him in the early years when there wasn't much growing on his land. I visited him as he went through the program and saw how he was improving the soil, how he was putting trees back onto the land, seeing how he's starting to harvest more from the land, how his income was starting to improve. And so I was really, really happy to see all that progress that he was making. Then he graduated from the program. I didn't see him for many years, but I went back to visit probably 10 years after he had graduated from the program, or maybe 12 years later, wondering if he would still have continued forward with it, sort of holding my breath. And I got to his farm, and it was more beautiful than ever. And I walked up the little path to the house, and I was really happy to see that the house was no longer mud walls and dirt floor. It was a concrete house with a nicer, healthier living situation for his family. And then I really wondered, had he succeeded with his big goal of sending his daughters to high school? And as it turned out, one of his daughters was there. And she walked around and was showing me around the farm, showing me the crops that were growing, showing me the coffee growing in the shade of the big, beautiful trees. And as we were talking, all of a sudden she started speaking to me in English, which I had not expected at all. My jaw just dropped. And I said, "Oh my gosh, Argelis, you speak English?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "How did you learn English?" And she said, "Well, after I graduated from high school, I went to college, and I'm in college now, and I'm getting my degree in English." And so then I realized that not only had her father succeeded in his dream of sending his daughters to high school, something he hadn't been able to do, but as it turns out, they both had even gone on to study in the university. And I saw that it happened not at the expense of the environment, but because he had learned how to grow using practices that enhance nature, that work with nature, that mimic nature, and that he had created a beautiful ecosystem on his farm that was supporting the local wildlife and supporting his family as well. And then as I left the farm, a flock of parakeets flew overhead and again reminded me that it was not just his family that was benefiting, but it was a lot of other species whose families were benefiting as well.
What makes you the most excited or optimistic about the work that you're doing and about the future?
Definitely, my thinking has changed around the value and the importance of the work that we do. Initially, I was focused strictly on forest preservation for forest preservation's sake, for habitat preservation, which I still think is incredibly important. But I think that now my awareness around our planet and whether it's going to remain livable for human society is now looking at two different pieces. One is the loss of biodiversity, which I see us contributing to restoring habitat and restoring biodiversity on all of the farms where I work. And then the other one is climate change, which has come onto my radar screen since starting the organization. It wasn't there at the beginning, but now I look at the tremendous shift that human society needs to make if we don't want to go off a cliff in terms of climate change and biodiversity loss. And I see people struggling with this and struggling with the fact that we have to make some difficult changes. But I feel a lot of hope in the fact that a really easy change that is happening and could happen at a huge scale is this shift to what's now called regenerative agriculture in a lot of circles, agriculture that regenerates the environment, the climate, instead of degrading it. And there are 500 million small-scale farms around the world that are producing a tremendous amount of food for most of the world's population. And if they shifted to the types of farming practices that Sustainable Harvest teaches, we've estimated that they could get us 53% of the way to the United Nations goal for net greenhouse gas reductions by putting carbon back into the soil, by putting carbon back onto the land in the form of trees and other perennial crops. And they can do that without making any sacrifices, really, but instead shifting to farming practices that will better feed their families, better feed their communities, give them a better standard of living, a better livelihood. And so for me, visiting many of the 4,000 farms who have made that transition with Sustainable Harvest is what gives me hope. Seeing the families thriving and happy and knowing that what's helping them thrive, helping them to have a good life is also helping to restore the planet. So I see tremendous hope in that if the world can get behind them and give them that support they need, which is really mostly technical assistance. That's what gives me the most hope. My work is very much grounded in the lessons that I learned as a Peace Corps volunteer, and has been from the start, and it still is today. And part of it is the importance of an entrepreneurial approach and taking the reality that you're given, taking the stumbling blocks that are placed in front of you and turning them into the stepping stones to move the work forward, being adaptable and being resilient in order to move the work forward. And the importance of listening, working collectively, and knowing that the idea that I might start with isn't the best idea, and being ready to let go of that, to listen to others and come up with a better idea that's going to be more successful because it has more voices contributing to it, while at the same time holding on to the core ideals. And when ideas are presented that aren't good ones, being also having the strength to say no, that's not the best approach. All of those skills, I think, have been very important.
Is it that time already? We're coming to the close of the episode, but not before I give Flo a chance to answer our dubious Aunt Deb.
Why do we spend so much time and effort helping farmers outside the USA when we have plenty of our own that could use our help?
I think there's a number of ways to approach that. One, which probably wouldn't be as effective, is to quote all of the statistics out there that show that every dollar we invest overseas comes back to our country many-fold. But I find that usually isn't the most effective way. I think it's more effective to talk to people about the sort of specific examples of what work overseas does, and talk to them about those families that are feeding themselves well, that are living better. Because of that, they're not going to feel pressured into crime. They're not going to feel pressured into violence. They're not going to feel pressured to come to the United States, possibly without the documentation, which I love all of the migrants that I know in this country and really appreciate all they contribute, but I don't want them to feel forced to make that trip if they would rather stay in their communities, if they could have a way to thrive there. And so giving them that opportunity to thrive there, I think just takes away so much of the angst and conflict that we have in our society around migration now. And it's such a small investment to help people to do well for themselves. And then there's the environmental piece where I think we all would like to live in a world where everybody can feel secure, can feel like they're going to have a planet that's going to support their children and future generations. And investing in programs overseas, you just get so much bang for your buck. People are so willing to work with you and put in a tremendous amount of effort to make these changes for themselves and for their families, but the changes for the planet that we all want to live in. And so I think that's what I try to talk about with people who maybe don't appreciate how valuable overseas work is.
Huge thanks to Flo Reed this week for sharing her stories with us. Flo Reed is a prize-winning thought leader, innovative practitioner, and deeply engaging speaker who believes that when people work together, things can change for the better. This belief led to her Peace Corps service and ultimately to her founding Sustainable Harvest International, or SHI, a nonprofit organization dedicated to working with rural Central American communities to implement sustainable farming practices and preserve tropical forests. Since its founding in 1997, SHI has helped more than 4,000 smallholder farms in Central America to convert 30,000 acres of degraded land into regenerative agroecology practices that include 5 million trees. They are working steadily towards a goal of reversing 8 million acres of degraded land, achieving food sovereignty for 5 million people. Their Training to Expand Eco-Agricultural Program, or TREE, was recently accepted as one of the Clinton Global Initiative's commitments to action. Flo represents SHI in many networks, including the 20 by 20 Initiative, 1T.org, and the Global Partnership on Forest Landscape Restoration. She's also on the advisory committee for the National Peace Corps Association and Regeneration International. Her work has been recognized with several awards and 3 honorary doctorates. Thanks for listening. Along with our soft, powerful storytellers, we believe fervently in the importance of constructive U.S. engagement with the rest of the world. If you enjoyed these stories, this history, I have a small ask. Like the show, follow the show. Leave a review. Reviews count so much in helping the algorithms point this show to the ears that need to hear it most. And give us your feedback. Visit www.softpowerfulstories.org for a chance to leave reviews, to see pictures, to check out lots of stuff around these episodes. And, of course, to get in touch with us. Ninoshka Benfeld, my old colleague from Guatemala, provided the voice for the Mayan sang at the very beginning of this. Our show's logo was designed by the incredibly talented Kate Furby. My friend Kathy Zilski voices Dubious Aunt Deb. She's nothing like Dubious Aunt Deb, but she plays her to perfection. I'm the host and creator of Soft Powerful Stories, Christopher Wurst. Until next time.